Alright, so we are going to do lesson 6-3 right now. I just want you to look right here. We are going to start talking about the real world situations. So right here, this is not a real world situation, but what would the domain and range be? If you're looking, this is linear. So the domain would just be the all real numbers. If you wrote it in set notation, it would just have the squiggles on the side, and ditto for range. Okay, right here. Now, okay, so this is where it changes. Okay, that answer we wrote number 1 was all real numbers, but I need y'all to circle this. Sometimes if it's a real world situation, it has to be reasonable. I heard Alexa yesterday say something about, well, you can't have negative minutes or something of that sort. So that's where she was already headed in the reasonable domain and range direction. So I was proud of that. So let's look at example A, and this is a real world situation, and we are going to talk about what the reasonable domain and range would have to be. The initial rate being $3, which, as y'all know, that should be your y-intercept, so go ahead and mark that. And this is your function. It charges $2 for each mile traveled, which is your slope. So that's rise 2, run 1 mile. Rise 2, run 1 mile. So you can look at it that way, and it would continue from there. So let's go right here. And so if we're looking at these, what would your reasonable domain and range be? Here is the domain in set notation. X has to be greater than or equal to 0. It can be equal to 0, but it can't be negative values. The reasonable range would have to be this in set notation. Y would have to be greater than or equal to 3, because if that's how much money you had to pay no matter what, you couldn't have less. This is miles. Maybe I should write that. And this is the money. So just pay attention to the reasonableness of the situation. Now you're going to try that. Try these A, and I want to see what you get. Okay, so now I just need you to check these and notice what I wrote here. If you need to pause the video and check, that's fine. Alright, so now we're just going to go to the next page. Looking at this, the graph below represents a real-world situation. So in this real-world situation, identify the domain and range. Okay, pause the video and do that. So check your answers for domain and range. Remember, what do you call this kind of graph? This is called discrete. So because it's discrete, you cannot say all whole numbers or all real numbers or anything of that sort. So you had to specifically name the discrete values that will be incorporated into this real world situation, and they are listed below in set notation. Now I want you to answer B and C. We will not necessarily have the same answers, so I want you to come up with your own. So looking at my situation, which of course can be different than yours, it should be, but it says a bowling alley charges $1 to rent your shoes. So that would be like this right here, your initial value. And then from there, it's $2 per game, but it's only up to 4 games. So $2 for game 1, $2 game 2, game 3, and then game 4, and that's as far as you can go with that. So therefore, what would these independent values right here, let me actually highlight that. These independent values would represent the number of games, and your Y values, which would be your dependent, would represent the total amount you're going to get charged. So now you're going to check your understanding, pause the video, and then we'll check together. Alright, so looking right here for number 4, what is your reasonable range for the situation talking about a person's height? You cannot have a person's height equal to 0, because that means they wouldn't exist, and their height cannot be negative. So you could just say, like, another way to say that, I guess, would be like positive real numbers. Okay. Number 5, let's see, what is the reasonable domain? So if you're talking about your domain, it looks like the total cost of group of X people. X is your tour members in this situation. So X has to be your whole numbers, because it's tour members. You can't have half a person, and they cannot be negative. You don't have negative people. Okay, so now I need you to complete lesson 6-3 practice. I mean, literally, it's number 6 and 7. We will check those together, and then I also need you to complete page 95 and 96 if you haven't completed all that already. So all the way 1 through 22 on page 95 and 96.